everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often, those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. In the case of this month's guest, Paul Cunningham, he was recommended to me by Olivia Cronk. If you liked that episode, you'll like this one, and if you like this one and haven't heard that one, you'll want to go back and give it a listen. Paul Cunningham is the recipient of the 2021 Diane Bielecki Poetry Prize and the 2015 Sparks Prize Fellowship. He is the author of The House of the Tree of Sores, Schism Press, as well as Fall Garment, also from Schism. From the Swedish, he's the translator of Helena Oosterlund's Words from Press. He also translated two chapbooks by Sarah Tuss Effrick, Automania's Select Poems from Good Morning Menagerie, and The Knight's Belly from Toad Press. His most recent poetry chapbook is The Inmost from Carrion Bloom Books. His interests include literary translation in theory and practice, decadent poetics, and eco-critical studies. He co-manages Action Books, an international press for poetry and translation. Cunningham is also an invited member of the International Network of Comparative Humanities, funded by Princeton University at the University of Notre Dame. He is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Georgia. If you would like to support the show, you can do so. Primarily, the best way is patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. I got 3 different tiers and they all have different things. You could throw a one-time donation to me over at paypal.me/noisemakerjoe. Or you could buy my book. It's called Tired, out from Alien Buddha Press, and it's on Amazon. You could also just give this podcast a 5-star review wherever you're listening to it. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Paul. So I think we'll start out with Fall Garment, because that's the most recent piece that I've read, and then we can spiral out from there. Was it from Fall Garment that you read for Meg's book release party?
Yeah, okay. I
Okay.
read from the second section, Sick Arc.
Okay, I like that part. Speaking of which, the thing I've noticed in both of your books that I've read is that in breaking them up, particularly in Fall Garment, I felt like the sections were quite a bit different, at least like stylistically.
Mm-hmm.
And as a person who's self-described bad at poetry, like, it's always interesting to me to see like how people structure a book of poetry. Like, you know, the form of the poem has become so nebulous into what it can be, so open, that I'm always kind of surprised what I find. And maybe that's because I read like 5 poetry books a year, and and they're all in like our world. But I don't know. So yeah, talk about like the impetus for this book and then how you decided to structure it.
So that section that I read from the Sick Arc, I'd say I wrote that section last. Actually, that was the last thing I wrote in this 3-part collection. The first part I wrote was Fall Garment, and a lot of Fall Garment has to do with Tom Brown, the fashion designer, Sir Thomas Browne, the Renaissance philosopher, also Luchino Visconti's adaptation of Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, which was an inspiration for one of Tom Brown's menswear lines, specifically his 2019 beachwear line. It was this really surreal, kind of fucked up, beach-themed fashion show that was inspired specifically by the fashion worn in the film Death in Venice. I had never seen or read Death in Venice prior, but I've been a longtime fan of Tom Brown's fashion. I love his shows. And so then basically I just kept diving deeper and deeper into it's a fashion show, but it's influenced by this iconic film that's also adapted by from this Thomas Mann novel. But then there's this controversy in the film because the young actor in the film, Bjorn Andresen, was manipulated or exploited, and I just kept uncovering all these layers, and I think it's oh yeah, I'm blanking on the film, Midsummer. Ari Aster's Midsummer. If you've seen it, you know about the scene with the old man who he falls off the cliff and face bashed in, and there's this weird connection. So that actor is actually Bjorn Andresen, who was the boy from Death in Venice, who plays Taggio in the film. And he was kind of like one of the world's first teen icons. And Visconti had dubbed him the most beautiful boy in the world. And his life was kind of basically ruined by this iconicity. And there's since a documentary has come out after I wrote this book, because the more research I kept doing led me to, I think I got it was the Criterion version of Death in Venice, and there was I always watch the extras on those, and the casting call was really creepy. I thought the casting call was pretty creepy, and the footage was kind of creepy. And now there's a documentary, and so it's like this whole weird thing that I kind of got caught up in, where this guy whose life was basically ruined by becoming an icon, who was once known as the most beautiful boy in the world, is starring in this Ari Aster film, having his face smashed in and kind of blown apart to bloody pulp. And so I've since watched the documentary, and I liked it a lot. But I just kept going deeper and deeper and into Tom Brown's work as a meticulous designer, someone who cares a lot about predecessors and rites and rituals, and it has to be done this way. And maybe is Tom Brown embracing an American exceptionalism, or is he critiquing it? And then I'm also reading this book called Hydrotaphy at the same time by this Renaissance thinker, Sir Thomas Browne, who is obsessed with Christian burial methods. There's a right way and a wrong way to bury, and it has to be done a meticulous way, and we can't cremate, it must be buried. But the important thing at the end of the day is everyone makes it to heaven. And so I just saw these two figures who also, oddly, these two figures that are obsessed with control, who share the same name and different eras of history. Yeah, that was the first hole I fell down. And yeah.
And what a hole.
You have to interrupt me. I'll just ramble.
It's totally fine. It makes my job easier. The Tom Brown, I'm Googling as you're talking. The Spring 29 beachwear thing. Is that the one with the weird masks? Yes. Really creepy, eerie masks. It's very like a cardboard cutout, cheap Spirit Halloween version of like a Slipknot mask or something.
Yes, they look like Slipknot masks. Exactly. Yes,
they really do.
It's like high couture meets Slipknot. It's
Yeah,
great.
it's like you found the fabric for a baby onesie and a bunch of gingham and a sort of crazy bondage
Right.
mask, and then said, "All right, I'm going to do this."
Right. Yeah. Yes. And it's because you reminded me because you mentioned gingham. Another thing that I'm obsessed with is his the way he draws, the way he works. His fashion sketches, they look like some sort of cubist. Everything's geometrical, and I mimic this in the book. So I do my own kind of Tom Brown influence sketch in the beginning of each section of the book. Factory Appetite and Sick Arc are the first two sections. They have similar drawings, but it's like if he draws a triangle, that means pleated skirt. Square equals jacket. A rectangle might mean bulky outerwear. And so he does these weird geometrical sketches that are then interpreted by a team or maybe misinterpreted. But he begins with this. He begins with this geometry, and then comes fabric, and then comes everything else.
That's fascinating. That's how you would work that way.
I love the drawings alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you even mentioned the drawings at the beginning of each section in this book, because I think sometimes I tend to, and not in a cynical way, maybe in a sort of, maybe it's a result of my underestimating my abilities to understand art or something. But sometimes I'll see stuff like that in one of the books I do for the show, or just reading our peers, and just go like, oh, okay, diagram, cool. Diagrams are cool. Let's try to get to the words. But yeah, that's fascinating. My wife and I watch the various Heidi Klum fashion design competition shows, Making the Cut, and I can't remember the name of the other one that's older than that, but
Project Runway, maybe.
Probably. For whatever reason, I want to call it America's Next Top Model, but that's not it.
Maybe it's America. Yeah, you might be right. Yes.
That's the one for modeling, but because there's a runway involved and my wife watches it, they're the same in my brain. But they have B-roll of people drawing, but the sort of strange coded diagram thing is completely new and wild to me. Such that, like, I don't even know. I kind of want to figure out a way to do that for writing, like plot out a novel with just wordless diagrams somehow. But I need.
I used to, and I think I figured it out, but it just doesn't. It's not the same. But there was a time, and I really relied on this a lot for structuring things, whether it was like mostly poetry collections, but it's I write a lot of prose too. I just haven't published a novel yet, but or even if you want to, I don't know if I think of them as novels or maybe just books, but because people still don't even. The House of the Tree of Swords has been called a book of poetry, and it's also been called a novel, and but. There used to be this way you could zoom out on Microsoft Word and look at every page. You could look at like 110 pages at once. And I'd be fascinated by, like, why in these first 15 pages is text so sparse? And then it gets fuller here. And Microsoft Word's been up, it's gone through so many updates over the years. And it's not, I found a way to kind of mimic that, but I miss that. I miss being able to. I don't know why, but it really helped me. Or maybe it just made me second guess everything I was doing. I don't know, but you reminded me of that.
I mean, the act of editing is so arcane anyway that it seems like literally anything that we can do to sort of give us a push in any direction is going to be useful. Yeah, I did that when I was working on one of my novels. I like zoomed all the way out and then took a picture of the computer screen with my phone
Yeah.
and put it on Instagram or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's a
Yeah, the Tree of the House of Swords, I guess I'd call it a hybrid work, but I also don't have a good like functional definition for what hybrid poetry or hybrid prose even is. But some of the people in a Discord I'm in were talking about trying to like collect hybrid works to teach.
oh yeah.
A conversation I could only watch and not participate in. And I hadn't read the Tree of the House of Swords yet, so I couldn't think to even bring it up. But yeah, because there's like a plot, or at least a narrative, and it like breaks into line breaks and then kind of coalesces again into prosier bits. But yeah, I have a friend who like blew my mind recently by talking about how flash fiction, like, is that just prose poetry? Which like not something I had even considered before either.
Yeah, I feel like if you're ever like struggling, if you're like talking to a writer in a bar or something and you're struggling to find something to kill time over, you just, is it a flash fiction or is it a prose poem? And you can just.
Yeah, where do
I don't know, and I really don't have a strong opinion either way,
Okay.
but I do gravitate towards the role of poet. So.
So that kind of answers, because I know some people get really grumpy about
They get really
designating.
yeah.
Like I just kind of I like, because I'm prosier in my practice. I just kind of I think about like, I'm gonna sit down and write a piece of flash fiction, and then if it happens to be longer than 750 words or whatever, it's like, I guess I wrote a short story.
Well, yeah, and I've worked in a similar way. I wrote this when I was living in Georgia. I lived in Georgia for the last 6 years. I'm in Indiana again, and I found it really strange that you could, if you looked at, I'm blanking on, I guess, yeah, pest control, like various pest control businesses. And I'm normally thinking of like, I don't know, insects or raccoons or whatever. But it was this thing in Georgia that called nuisance foxes. It wasn't a fox. It was, are you experiencing a nuisance fox? And I ended up writing a short story, air quotes, called Nuisance, which was about a fox. A fox as a character, a fox that speaks and thinks. But I thought it was going to be a series of prose poems. That's how I wrote it. I wrote like a paragraph per page for a long time, and then it became a short story. Yeah, I feel like everything I do begins in some sort of poem mode or a poet's frame of mind. People get grumpy about the lyric too, and I don't get grumpy about that's fine as well. I like the prose poem. I like the lyrical mode. I like line breaks. I think you can do things with line breaks that you can't do in a prose poem.
Yeah, I in college read a lot of Laura Kaczynski, who would like, and I've kind of adopted this, who would have just, you know, line breaks, and then kind of like a short paragraph in the middle of the page, and then line breaks the rest of the way down. That I was like, oh yeah, that's totally fine, because like if a line doesn't need a line break and the page isn't wide enough, then it becomes a prose section.
Right.
Like, if you don't need a line break, don't put a line break in. And that was kind of revolutionary for me as a, I guess, geez, what age are you when you graduate college normally? In my 20s, in my early 20s.
Yeah.
Like, that was something that was really cool for me, because I remember a couple years later reading a different poem where, like, it's clear that they had to fuck with the margins on every poem because some of the poems had like one really long line.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you just keep the margins the same and little prosy section. But I guess if it's a reprint and the book was initially published in a different, I don't know. I kind of liked that idea of, and I don't even think I had been like introduced to the idea of a hybrid work before. I think I probably first heard of it when I first started trying to submit writing, and people are like, prose, poetry, and hybrid, and I'm like, I guess that's both.
I think my first exposure was Anne Carson's autobiography of Red. I think that's the first time an instructor had ever prefaced something as a hybrid. And maybe also Robert Coover's The Grand Hotels of Joseph Cornell. Those are, again, it's like, are they prose poems or are they flash fiction pieces? But that was a really like formative book as well. And I think of them as ekphrastic poems responding to different boxes that Joseph Cornell made. And my favorite, and I think it's my favorite box he did as well, was I think it's called Grand Hotel Penny Arcade. I love that one. And then my favorite poet is Osabai. Swedish poet who's written a lot of prose poetry, translated by Johannes Göransson. She has a book called With Deer, and I don't know if any other book has had such a profound influence on me, because I've never read anything else like it. But she also moves back and forth from a prose lyrical mode. She has a book called Transfer Fat, and they kind of function like little lyrical lullabies with line breaks, but a lot of her work is prose blocks.
So here's something, because you also translate, right?
Right, I translate from Swedish.
Okay.
No Swedish ancestry.
Cunningham doesn't make me think Swedish.
Right, well, right.
But I guess
right.
last names are last names.
I confuse people because I have no Swedish ancestry. But someone one time at a reading, and it was really funny. They pronounced my name Cunningham.
Oh.
And I to this day I still have friends that'll from that reading, when they see me they'll call me Cunningham. But it's a Scottish
I mean, are there a lot of people working in Scottish Gaelic anyway? I guess.
Well, people think I lie. People think I'm lying when I say I translate Swedish. People like not like writers or artists or anything, but like when I just when I worked at a movie theater for 5 or 6 years in between undergrad and grad school or whatever, and I mean, I think there's people to this day that think I was just yanking their chain. Yeah, sure, you translate Swedish, but it was something I'd been interested in since I was like 16.
Like particularly Swedish? And
yeah.
Where does that come from? Where does the interest in Swedish come from?
So again, it sounds weird, but I had so I left my home district high school to go to a performing arts charter school when I was a teenager, and I was studying fiction there. But I don't think I was a very good fiction writer at the time. And I had a poetry instructor who definitely insisted I was a better poet at the time. And ultimately, the long story short, this instructor gifted me a copy of Osabuys with Deer. And my dad knows German, and I'd always thought that I'd maybe learn German. But this was like the first bilingual book of anything I'd ever read with such enthusiasm, and I noticed, in my opinion, like Swedish is even closer to English than German. But there are still there's similarities. Dog is going to be the same in German as it is in Swedish. It's Hund. It's spelled the same way.
Right.
There's definitely crossover, but I feel like Swedish, it's not so throaty. It's not so thick.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel like it was closer to English, so I felt like it was easier to learn and pick up. And but yeah, like I feel like most people's first I don't know, translated poetry is like Rumi or something.
Sure.
And I never read Rumi.
Yeah, I have some Rumi sitting on my bookshelf that I need to read eventually. But I mean, I came to Rumi through the religious route, where I was
really?
I was watching a bunch of YouTube videos about like ecstatic mystics and stuff, and Rumi's is one, or at least like in that world. And it's like, yeah, the love poetry, like it's love letters to God. He's writing about a lady, but it's God.
Right.
And I just think that that's so funny that in America the best-selling poet is just a Sufi mystic writing poems about Allah. I'm reading Rilke's Book of Hours right now, which is basically the German Rumi.
Right.
And I was reading the translator's notes, and they're like, "Yeah, we combined a couple of poems here," and I was like, "What? Why would you do that?" And I'm like, it's one of the editions with German on one side and English on the other, because I know some German. I could probably keep myself from getting too lost. Is about how good I am at it. But and so I mean, mystical poetry plus language practice sounded pretty good to me. But a lot of the changes that they made were just interesting to me as they were explaining it in the translator's notes. They're like, yeah, we decided not to make it rhyme, and we merged a couple poems together, and we left one out. And
well, that's a thing, and some of these arguments, they drive me crazy. This thing called phonetic translation, where, I mean, it depends on the person, but you'll meet people that believe like it's the altar where they worship. It's all about phonetic translation. We must put aside definition and meaning and prioritize sound, and we will preserve the sound of the original French in the English. And then you have it the other way too, which is we will sacrifice all sound and rhythm to preserve meaning and definition. And I think when you can find a happy coincidence, when you can preserve both meaning and sound, which is really fun in Swedish because of all the neologisms. You get all these neologisms because there's these Swedish words and phrases that just have no English equivalent. And then there's Swedish punning that or any language has punning that's not going to translate into English. So you have to get really creative sometimes. But I do find it interesting because people get very angry about that.
Mm-hmm.
It must be a phonetic translation. It must, or we must sacrifice sound for meaning. Very interesting.
Right. I read the Poetic Edda 2 years ago too, and like that, the Old Norse poetry is so strict with its rules. Like all of the, why can't I think of the word? Where the first letter of the words are the same, or the sound. Assonance.
Assonance.
Yeah,
Assonance.
geez, Lou. Holy cow. Wow. Any poetry cred I had. Like all the assonance
No worries.
and like certain things like any vowels, any word that starts with any vowel at all is assonant to the next one. And then of course the Norse poems all have kennings, tons of kennings, because they need to make things rhyme and they need to make things follow those rules. So you have, oak tears, and it's like, oh, that's Odin because men are like trees and oaks are the best trees, and tears because he plucked out his eye or whatever.
Right.
And then so translating that, and then translation is something I've just been thinking about a lot as I find myself in my free time getting into like really old texts, Greek, and reading the Old Testament or whatever, and like, almost being afraid. Like it took me forever to pick up any Plato at all because I was afraid that I was going to pick up the wrong translation from the Barnes and Noble, right? I was going to pick up something and it would color Plato for me forever. And then I'd have like tons of work to undo. And then of course, because he's so influential to everything else, that I'd have to like undo everything else once I read a different Plato translation.
Right.
And then as well, this is how easily I let myself get influenced by things. I watched the movie Patterson with Adam Driver, Jim Jarmusch movie from a couple years ago. And there's a scene where he sits down on a bench next to like a Japanese guy. And they talk in as little as they can conversate and share with each other that they're both poets. And the Japanese guy reads a poem in Japanese. I hope he's Japanese. And then, Patterson's like, yeah, that's very nice. It sounds beautiful, but obviously I don't speak your language, so I don't know what it is.
Right.
And the poet's like, yeah, if you don't read a poem in the original language, it doesn't really matter. I'm paraphrasing, but like, and that's like colored for me reading any work in translation, like ever. Like I become very anxious about the translation that I'm going to read.
No, I totally get that, and that's why I think, and I mean, I guess it's, one of the good things about the internet is typically, not always, but typically we can find the original, some recording of the original, so we can at least listen to it and compare. And it's hard for me to preserve things sometimes when I translate, because I'm not translating like I don't translate. I'm translating people that are still alive, and so I have to be careful how I ask questions sometimes, because it's like I'm just looking for a little bit of assistance with the English, but then I don't want to make the Swedish writer apprehensive, or like the feeling that she might need to revise something. Like no, I don't want to rewrite. We don't, So that's tricky, but there. I mean, so like a great example of one of the best readings I'd ever gone to. I think it was the first time I'd went to an AWP conference, and it was in Washington D.C. And the Chilean poet Raul Zurita read, who Action Books has published, and I don't really know My Spanish is not great, but I mean, I've never cried at a poetry reading prior to that. I had never gone to a poetry reading and broke down in tears. He's an incredible reader, and the delivery is so heavy, and it's kind of like you have this, or at least I did at the time, and I must have been like when I was 20 or 21 when I first got to see him read, and I definitely did not understand everything being said during that reading, but I did understand, and it was like an understanding of pain and suffering, and if you ever a chance to just listen to Raul Zurita read in Spanish, it's like intoxicating. I've not seen Patterson though. I'm afraid to watch it. I'm a huge Jim Jarmusch fan, but it's like people mention it. You'll see someone mention Patterson on Twitter, and then everyone's like, "Oh, someone's talking about Patterson," and then the opinions and but I know people that love that film, and I know people that hate that film. I'm afraid to watch it, but I do love Jim Jarmusch very much. What's it called? Down by Law. That's my favorite film, Down by Law.
I haven't seen that one.
There's this great ice cream bit. Anyway.
I think I only like accidentally watch Jim Jarmusch films. Like I just like, oh, this looks good, and then
a great accident.
And then later I'm like, oh, that was the same guy who did Coffee and Cigarettes or whatever.
Tom Waits is a great I just love Tom Waits. That new Paul Thomas Anderson film that came out, that was also, everything's controversial these days, but that was a controversy too. But my God, I mean, it wasn't my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson film, but I will say, I would have just preferred that film to be about just the Sean Penn and Tom Waits character. I could have just watched those two characters for an hour and a half and been pretty happy. But yeah, Tom Waits is great. I'm Down by Law.
I'm such a Tom Waits fan of like his whole thing. Like as I slowly start to get older, the fact that I remember watching a interview with him on one of his, maybe like Letterman, because he was on Letterman a million times. And he asked him like, why did you make your voice sound like that? Like you did that on purpose. And he's like, I'm just kind of I've always been obsessed with being an old man. And like, every once in a while, people will share like Bible verses and they're like, this gives me peace. Like Tom Waits talking about always wanting to have been an old man is one of the things that makes me feel at peace in the world. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to get old, but it's okay. Yeah. If it's good enough for Tom, it's good enough for me.
Well, exactly. Like, I don't know his net worth or anything, but I know the man drinks Old Crow, and that's good enough for Tom Waits. And every now and then I'm like, if Old Crow's good enough for Tom Waits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's one of the people who I don't know if I believe, like, especially his early stuff is like so noir.
Yeah, yes.
That like I don't know if I believe that he wasn't just living in the suburbs and reading watching The Big Sleep every night before he goes to bed to get inspiration or whatever, because it's like so out there. But he's one of those people that like it would not matter to me if he came from money and whatever. Like he commits to the bit and he's so good at it that I don't care.
Same.
Oh man. I was lucky enough to watch Patterson before I got onto writer Twitter. So
oh, good. Oh, writer Twitter's the worst.
I was, it's a really slow movie, and there's something kind of zen about it, but it also, I don't know, it feels almost like Bartleby the Scrivener to me, and that like depending on the mood I'm in, I can interpret the film to reflect my mood. Like it's either a movie about a poet who's deeply depressed or about a guy who's perfectly content in his life, and I can't tell which.
Right. Okay. Well, you're selling me. You're selling me on it. I I haven't seen that film, and I haven't seen Ghost Dog. I haven't seen Ghost Dog.
Yeah, Ghost Dog. It's
Those are the
probably
only two Tom, or not Tom, those are the only two Jim Jarmusch films I haven't seen.
wow. That's one of those films that like I look at the cover and I'm just like, it looks like a film that somebody made to make money from like video store rentals.
Oh.
You know, like back in the day when you just have like a type of cover just to put on a VHS tape.
All right.
And how many bad fantasy, direct to video movies have been made because of a great painting. But yeah, I don't know. Like it doesn't strike me as a movie that is going to be good.
Yeah, I mean I do admittedly prefer his older stuff, but I did really love Dead Man. Dead Man's great. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to make an
And he's
effort
great
to
hair.
see some more of his movies because I've only seen like 2 or 3.
He is great hair.
He does have good hair. I will say that. So yeah, I don't know. For some reason, when I was imagining doing this interview, I imagined us talking about translations a lot more. But I think I kind of like understand where you're at with it. For some reason, I thought it would be like a much more like, I don't know, defining our terms heavy sort of thing. But I guess not. And that's totally fine. So we'll circle back to the Tree of the House of Sores then, which came out before Fall Garment, also from Schism.
Yes.
And has a sort of, I saw you talking about it on Twitter the other day.
Oh God.
In reference to This House Has People in It.
Oh yeah. So yeah.
Go ahead
I
with
did
that.
not. James had been telling me to. James Pate wrote this really generous review of that book, and he had told. I didn't know he was doing that, and I loved the review, and but he had told me months ago. That I need to watch This House Has People in It. And I didn't know it was the same director as that the other like Adult Swim short film, Unedited Footage of a Bear, which I had seen and I do love. I had no idea it was the same director, so I finally watched it, and I thought that was incredible too. And I'm just wondering like what this filmmaker's up to. Seems like a genius.
It's I don't know if it's credited as one director, but it's part of Wham City Comedy. They were, I think they're like on hiatus now, just like a group of like 4 or 5 people. And
Okay.
they've done those 2, and then they've done 2 like those like super late night Adult Swim things. They did these.
Well, they have them organized on if you go to like HBO Max, I think it's HBO Max, has an Adult Swim category.
Yeah.
And you can watch both and other things.
You watch them on Adult Swim or on HBO. That's
It's
hilarious.
you can. So it's so weird, and I'm still confused. But and then it's not that I don't think it's the same director. I could be wrong, but it's the same. They have Too Many Cooks on there too.
Yeah.
But they're calling all of those short films, Too Many Cooks, Unedited Footage of a Bear. They're calling all of those short films infomercials on HBO
right.
Max.
Okay.
They're calling it a series called infomercials. I don't know. And
I see. Okay. Live Forever as You Are Now with Alan Resnick is the same group of people.
oh, okay.
And then there's some more. They did these. It's probably not on this as I'm scrolling through. They did these like a series called, I always get the name mixed up because it's like a very generic title. It's the Call of Man or the Call of War. Yes, the Cry of Man and the Call of War. These TV miniseries on Adult Swim, where they're like improv people. This Wham City comedy, and they had like a call-in show. So they have a story, and then people call in, but because it's like 4:00 in the morning on Adult Swim, it's like, you know, some high dude who just saw a phone number on a TV screen and decided to call in, and they're still in character trying to like get something out of him.
Yeah.
And we've gone on a huge tangent because you've unlocked my secret Wham City comedy love. This house has people in it, has like secret codes and a website associated with it that has passwords that you have to like use clues to break into, and there's a whole like world of stories. They did a whole world building project associated with this. And there's like extra videos and things like that. And they have a book on Audible that is apparently really good, that like breaks the fourth wall and does a whole bunch of crazy things to your brain. Nice. But I guess that doesn't really have anything to do with your book. Just I any chance I have to proselytize ARGs, I do it.
James bringing it up, I mean, he really had me thinking, and I just everything I do, everything I do, I think in terms of projects. I don't really write titled poems. I don't like, today I'm going to write my poem about the blue jay I saw on the way home from, everything's kind of done in terms of projects. And so when I was writing that, and that I mean, Fall Garment, I wrote Fall Garment in 2 years. And I spent 6 years writing The House of the Treosaurs. I broke it up into different showrooms. And I love, it depends on the IKEA, I guess. But I had been to IKEAs that they project from the ceiling an arrow onto the floor to guide you throughout the IKEA. I guess there's some IKEAs where the arrow is just kind of like a sticker on the floor, but I really gravitated towards this idea that if the IKEA and the furniture and everything's come to life and it's controlling and manipulating the protagonist and the reader, what happens? What happens if the arrows are guiding you in the wrong direction? What if you are a reader who knows nothing about Swedish and you're just trying to understand things? What if the book fucks with you a little bit? And honestly, I thought about the scene in the David Bowie Labyrinth film where there's these creatures that live under, like I don't know if you've seen Labyrinth, but there's the Jennifer Connelly's character, Sarah. She's trying to like leave herself breadcrumbs so that she can get out of the labyrinth. So she keeps writing arrows on the ground with her lipstick. And there's these creatures that they lift up the stones and they turn them to send her back in the direction that she started. I was like, what if I do that with the IKEA? And it wouldn't work if they were stickers. So I like the IKEAs that project the arrows, and I was thinking about that. But I was thinking about the whole project is, and this I don't know if the book would work in other languages that weren't as close to English. Maybe Spanish. I think Spanish might work, but I kind of wanted English readers to feel simultaneously comfortable, feeling like they're learning. Oh, this word is Swedish, but it reminds me of something in English. I feel comfortable now. And then like the rug is the rug is pulled out from under them. But it kind of so I wanted it to be both challenging but also like inviting the reader in. Come on, play the game. Google Translate is a few clicks away. I don't know. That book, the Triosaurus book, hardly received any critical attention. The new book is receiving a lot of critical attention, and it might be because of the bilingual nature of the book. But yeah, Triosaurus is like my Ulysses. I love it.
I could tell you were having fun with it. You know,
it
feels like a book that was fun to write.
Yeah, I wanted it to be both fun and harrowing, like a House of Mirrors.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. I mean, Fall Garment like gets into like AIDS stuff and
yeah, Fall Garment's not fun, really. But
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's certainly beautiful. Like I found between the two works, I like the way that you put words together such that sounds like morph. I wish I had any examples in front of me right now, but I don't. But like, I guess the easy example is like the drum sounds that you write out.
Oh yeah.
And just, I don't know, like it seems like you're comfortable using internal rhyme and things like that, and trying to like make the poem musical to an extent. And that's because I listen to more like hip hop than poetry. I read whenever I write anything with line breaks in it, like it's much more informed by trying to make the words have a relationship with each other beyond meaning, and makes me happy to read something contemporary that does that too. And so yeah, that's, you know, between House of Swords and Fall Garment, like because I read Fall Garment first, it's like, oh, that's a thing he does, and then House of Swords is like, oh, okay, this is where this can go.
Yeah, I would say everything I write it in the headspace that it will be read aloud. And if I was to read Triosaurus aloud, I'm sure it sounds far more dynamic than it does just on the page. And then you get to hear more of the way sounds clash, or the way the English and the Swedish does not clash. And there's maybe some more euphonic sound there. At the same time, there's poets that everything they write is meant to only be read on the page, which I'm fine with that too. And I actually, one of my favorite poems to teach is E. E. Cummings' Grasshopper poem, which I'm blanking on the actual name of the poem. I always just call it the Grasshopper poem, but that's not what it's called. But the poem, syntactically, it's supposed to mimic a grasshopper jumping around the page. And it's literally like the word grasshopper changing and rearranging as it leaps. And I like to talk to my students about whether the poem is a readable poem. Can you perform this poem? Can you read this poem that was possibly maybe only meant to be seen on the page? And they like to come up and it all sounds like gibberish, and they try to read it out loud, but it's fun. And I think the best poetry is written when you're willing to let your guard down. But sound is really sounds really important to me.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you say that, and I'm glad that you think about it that way. I find that if I'm reading poetry alone or with the baby, I'm reading it out loud, because it's like the only way I kind of can feel like I get it, right? I'm so used to reading prose and even, narrative prose, because, in the past 6 years, or 4 years, I've read a lot of prose that isn't narrative, because of the show. But like, I grew up reading fantasy novels. Like, my eyes can kind of glaze over a battle scene, and I'm not going to miss out on too much. And I've sort of developed that as a bad habit, that especially in poetry, and I will find that I've read 3 poems and I don't know where they went. And so like I kind of have to read them aloud to get them. And I don't read poems with the poet voice, like I read them.
You don't read the poems?
No, I don't read the poems like that.
You don't read the poems?
There was a poem that I read like in a class that had words in all caps, because it was like quoting a sign, like an advertisement, roadside billboard or something, and it was in all caps. So I yelled it, and like everybody looked at me like I was an idiot.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's in all caps. What am I supposed to do? Like, this is, why you don't let the non-writing major person into your 300 level writing class. But yeah, I don't know. So, it feels good to read something where the words are working together, again, beyond that sort of semiotic way.
If it's all caps, let it out. Yop it, right? I mean, I guess like we're not supposed to like Dead Poet Society. We're supposed to say that it's cheesy and corny. But I think there's something to that scene where he makes the students yelp.
Mm-hmm.
I just like 80% of what's wrong with most poetry readings that anybody goes to, and God, I mean, like it was great. It was great. It was a negative and a positive. The Zoom readings, and we're still doing Zoom readings, and I love it. I can read with my friends. I'm gonna read with some friends this Saturday on Zoom. But like, if you've been to a reading in person that felt like agony, my God, it's not even comparable to like a Zoom reading. It's also agony. But yeah, I think just a lot of poets don't know how to read their work, and it can feel like a hostage situation. It's not even a question of like poet voice either, because like I feel like there's people that are really proud of their poet voice, that they've mastered poet voice, but then there's like monotone, barely here, these are my poems.
Yeah,
or
there's something
or
to poets
it's like have a poem that's like 3 couplets, but they're gonna, they qualify the poem, they preface the poem. You have to hear like a 10-minute introduction to these 3 couplets. Yeah, it can be brutal.
There's something to be said for like letting the words do the work, right? Like I get that.
Right.
Like I'm not going to influence you by reading it in a certain way. I'm going to read it in such a way that it is as pure, just the words as possible. But also, like, I mean, you're performing, man. Like, perform.
Right.
Whatever
and
that
sometimes
means.
I have to give like a little context sometimes, because like a lot of what I do is narrative. There's usually some sort of narrative. I mean, there might not be plot, but there's like some sort of there's usually like a character, a recurring like a recurring character. But like I was at this poetry reading once, and this guy was like, all right, this poem is about the never-ending story. Has anybody seen the never-ending story? If you haven't, and he starts summarizing the entirety of the never-ending story, and then reads the poem, which is like less than a minute long, and now we know who the flying dog is, or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, like I think like a lot of poets just read the poem, title, poem, no title, whatever. Uh, yeah. Sorry, I'm being
No,
I'm being mean.
I I don't think it's being mean. I worry about that a lot because I like to post things on Twitter about like how
Be
I feel
careful.
about things, and I'm not
You
even
should
Mr.
never
Hot.
do that.
I'm not even Mr. Hot Take or here or anything. Like
Right,
I
right, right.
try like very hard to like, how do I express what I'm thinking without giving any examples, such that nobody can think that I'm making any sort of like quality judgment, right?
Right, right, right.
And I still like half the time when I make a post like that, I feel like I need to like
Uh-oh.
reply to the post and be like, and by the way, this thing that I
Yeah,
said
yeah.
wasn't as good as this thing. Um, I love that thing. Like, here's a thing I love. It's really great when something is better than that. And half the time
Yeah,
I don't
nothing
because that, takes away from the whole.
nothing sucks more in life than going through like 9 years of graduate school and you share some quote from a poem on Twitter one day, and like 20 people are like, "Did you know that this poet in 1845 said this?" It's like, yeah. And they're very dead. They're very much dead and not profiting from, I don't know. But yeah, people are really angry all the time. But we should change the subject.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think, um, oh, the one other thing I wanted to make sure I brought up was in the House of Swords at the end of each section there's like here's a little bit of context, like this line is in reference to
Oh yeah,
a
yeah.
David Lynch thing, so and like I like that because it kind of like retroactively contextualizes some of the things, and I think also wraps it around to the beginning of the conversation where you were talking about all these Thomas Browns that influenced and these rabbit holes that have like these strange connections and stuff. And there's stuff like that in those sort of like, I forget what they were called, not further reading, but like here's notes to the reader sort of thing.
Supplementary. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I honestly, I was actually inspired by Don Che's first book, The Morning News is Exciting, does a similar thing, and then there's other poets I know that have included like notes, sometimes copious notes. I don't know. The stereotype seems to be that, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be poets, but any writer. They're just the ongoing stereotype is that poets, writers don't do research. We don't do research. We're just a bunch of just stoners, just wasting away, and we don't. And these questions are important. I think. Especially if you're like a writer that's going to involve yourself in the um, always nefarious academia. And if you're there for some creative purpose, there's going to be somebody else that thinks lesser of you, like you don't do research and you just kind of scoot by. And so I don't know. Part of that was um, both me wanting to provide additional context and also like this isn't just like a bunch of nonsense, like the stuff about the crocheted octopuses and stuff that got kind of outlawed in various Scandinavian countries for harboring bacteria. Even though they were these stuffed animals were helping children, but spreading germs because of the materials they were made from. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it really, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier about when we were talking about like how one should maybe contextualize a poem before reading it. I'm not anti context, but maybe like read the poem and then talk about it. I don't know. But I think the book has been accused of being very difficult and challenging and puzzling, and so might as well throw the reader some bones. All right, I'm gonna read from the final section of Fall Garment, which is also called Fall Garment. Discovery of a uniform whose yards open, the surface I appreciate quality is not what it seems, and THOM is corrected to TOM on the screen. Now there are two, and we are very focused on embracing the world we live in, bowels and regions, this apple, this center, nature, urns, coins, teeth, monuments below, the lawn, the mower, great antiquity, America, lawn, and lock, a daisy America, forefathers and daisy cutters, water escaping, bones and relics between Satan and archangel, body of Moses dividing, escaping salt ocean, lawless Adam and funeral pyre Eve of planed wood burnt, old city Ovid, in a silver urn Ovid, turning among crows, we live in our clothes, and water of all things concludes fire. Clothes are not precious matter, master, principle in composition. We like everything to be in order, white balloons and clean children, regular and uniform until degeneration warming particles. The quality of garments, the quality of matter remains fundamental. No natural landscapes. Wars served, wars survived. Many nations embrace fire, burning themselves alive. Days and years of last words, worms, everything living tweets, but birds, spectators, great idolaters of fire. Pollution is a deity exposing bodies unto vultures, beers of wood, fuel the who pollute the earth. We authentic devouring elements, mercilessly consuming, fish eating with our mouths, drying earth with our mouths, visible corruption, a debt of bodies, oldest element, Homer, drowning crowded into urn, outside, earning bodies, earning their trees, making use of trees. There's definitely things outside of fashion. I find myself laughing outside with much burning, barbarous nation. America. I stand outside of whatever that is and the way of obsequies, ashes of our Savior, of Peter, Paul, and the ancient martyrs, black and white angels in the hollow, expressionism, the custom of exact embalming. You fall into the commercial trap of not creating interesting things. A burst of sunflowers, a sepulchre entertains. He that observeth the eye is washed dead, nations wavering, mournful treble, animal law, thick as credit, phoenix, you need a touch of personality from sepulture, a burst of sunflowers, golden bees are swarming from sepulchral cells, garden gnomes carrieth out their dead, authors our repeat, bones and ashes our repeat, phoenixed, a severed ear, a plot of ground, surface of the ground, altars and urns, what perishes in name, perishes a different sound, a severed ear, military invasions, in hope of a better state, every daughter who's lived in an angle. When you make garments so perfectly, there has to be something that renders them a little imperfect. The populace, their urns, stood in resistance, endeavored to burn. Many coins buried them underground, iron rings and iron Caesars of bulk and bigness. The urns deposited nothing, only more uncertainty. These parts, garrisoned, planted before the dates of their interments, urns, lamps, bottles, terms of burning, magnificent burning, condemned the bones of men into Magma Town, the burying place of golden bridges, of musical instruments, grass hopping in a monument of urns, relics, a reliable form of thirst, used against them, knives of iron, wood, and brass. Menswear has always been important. We found their mouths pointed downward in cadaverous composure, our last bed, uniform, individuality, earth, inmost vault, inward red, sounding begot, looking testacious, the artifice of clay, statua reigns, such decline, earning, or offens of lay, or ordering, mode of Pythagoras, or coffins of clay, or circumscription, tinsel earth, or the first dog's grass, a grasshopper's bones as solemnized monument, the inscription containing time, oils, the Sedlak Chapel in Prague, computer of great conjunctions and kingdoms fatal, crude come drought, rings, coins, and chalice, corpse gold ringing, corpse teeth ringing, opaline fire I sink into earth, water into eternal green epithet, tomb of spectators, cypress of Diana, Aaron's olive rod, ark of Noah, vegetable fragments and undated ruins, floods, remains, we, among metal, test boundaries, Christians dispute how their bodies should lie in the grave, the eggshells, corruption. I feel very American in the monument, crumbling to pieces, magnetical parts, call it American sensibility, yet metal rusts, even pieces we admire rust, the hardest attrition, piercing atoms of air, they typewriter, piercing atoms of air, green entrails, flowers and ribbons, ties, in other words, men's ties, no sight of self, verses, only verses, ossuaries, the amphitheater, and so much tragedy, fragments of skulls, mixtures of bones. This is a collection of classic, beautifully made suits. This is a collection of classic, beautifully laid bones.